Right. And he goes, well, you're a candidate for surgery. By that time, I was maybe 36 or 37. I end up just saying, all right, I'll do it. But I'm scared to death about getting and I don't mean this as shit. Like, it's worked. Bariatric surgery, metabolic surgery for so many people in our community has been a life-saving thing, right? But for me, I felt too young to be rerouting things, rerouting my anatomy to try to fix something that I still felt like very much was a moral failing, like I was doing something wrong.
Dave Knapp, welcome to the American Glutton podcast.
Thanks, Ethan, man. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be here. So I appreciate you having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. You are a patient advocate. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I'm somebody who, has lived with the disease of obesity and type 2 diabetes now for the type 2 diabetes diagnosis now for like 3 years. And I just kind of started recording my journey on YouTube, and it's kind of blown up into what we now call like the first patient-centric obesity medicine news platform. My whole heart behind it is when I was diagnosed with diabetes and really starting to accept this idea that obesity is also a disease worthy of treatment. I came to the internet for more information. There was really a huge deficit of good information from the patient perspective. It's sort of like all the news that flows out about obesity and the related treatments for it they're intended for doctors or they're intended for investors. It's like two different people.
Right.
So I try to parse all that out and give it to patients in a way that empowers them to have better conversations with their doctors.
I mean, it's an interesting thing framed that way because diabetes, and this I only found out recently. I have a child with type 1 diabetes, which was diagnosed when she was 4. And so I always kind of, listen, I have no medical background whatsoever, but like then you get handed this situation and you start to like look into like what's affecting you. And so this is affecting me, because I'm now responsible for counting all her carbs and stuff like that at 4 years old. She's now 20. She's doing great. But like,
wow.
It becomes like, what is the treatment going to be? I always assumed, that type 2 diabetes was largely treated with diet, exercise, and a handful of other drugs. I heard about metformin. Of course, when I heard the word metformin, I looked into like, is this appropriate for my kid? And it was not. And I was like bummed, like this is something for the other type of diabetes. I come to find out far more people are taking insulin because of type 2 diabetes than because of type 1. I thought type 1 diabetes is strictly handled with insulin, and type 2 diabetes is handled with all these other protocols. You catch it early, you try to deal with it with food and stuff like that. And I found out like, no, it's a much higher number of people who are insulin dependent because of type 2 diabetes than because of type 1 diabetes. All this is to say, you get diagnosed with a disease, and the first thing the doctor talks to you about is the course of treatment. With obesity, this is something like when I was a kid and would go see the doctor would, say like, eat your fruits and veggies or exercise or just even like you should lose weight, and that would be the course of treatment that I was basically prescribed. And obesity, I think, affects even more people than type 2 diabetes, which affects an awful lot of people. I think I read, and I could be wrong, that like over 30 million people are insulin dependent because of type 2 diabetes. And obesity affects a heck of a lot. Now, those two can be hand in hand oftentimes, you'll see obesity first and then type 2 diabetes, but that's not always true. I have a friend whose father has type 2 diabetes and he was never overweight. So, but it is interesting now that we have these medications that can be prescribed for obesity that I would think more and more there will be like, well, you have this, now here's a medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that to be true in your journey and in your studies of all of this stuff?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry, I hit you with a lot. I just talk too much, probably.
No, I trust me. I do the same. That's why we have podcasts, right? We enjoy talking about this stuff. And so first of all, that has to have been rough. I'm a father of 4 children myself. And I think that, dude, the biggest thing that held me back from wanting to have kids, my wife was always, she wanted to have a nice big family. And I was scared to death about having a family and having kids for the number one reason of ever having to endure parenting a child who suffered in any way. And so I think, I just want to acknowledge that you've been through that, because while I've never had a chronically ill child, I've had kids that have been very sick before, and there's nothing more terrifying than that. So I'm sure that did set you off on probably like an obsession of trying to figure out what can we do. So, I just wanted to acknowledge that before we kind of moved on. When it comes to the disease of obesity, like, first of all, a lot of people have a hard time with that a disease, but it is a chronic relapsing disease. You don't know many people, if you think about it, who have been overweight and then been able to get their weight down and then keep it down, right? You are probably an exception to the rule. Most people get it down and it goes back up. And I'm sure you experienced this all throughout your own journey as well. Yeah. When it comes to medication and sort of how a doctor interacts with a patient with obesity, it is this kind of lifestyle modification, which obviously is a component of it. But I think where it has missed the mark for so long is that it's just the lifestyle modification, right? And if people were able to sustain what it takes to control your weight when you're living with obesity. And I think it's important to note that not everybody who has overweight has obesity. When we're talking about the metabolic disease, we're talking about some very specific metabolic dysfunction. Type 2 diabetes often comes along with that, but things like fatty liver disease and so much of controlling your weight and the homeostasis of your body goes back to the liver and how the liver is functioning, et cetera, et cetera. But it was just like this, kind of puts the onus back on the person, like you're overweight simply because of the choices that you've made. And you just need to put the fork down and move more. And again, lifestyle modifications play a very important role in treating obesity. But when you're talking about the dysfunction that comes along with that, what I always like to say is the metabolic playing field is not level at that point. So when you sit down with a patient who, and I have no medical background either, so I should get that out of the way right away. I'm just a patient who's lived with this. We are not
doctors.
Not doctors. Go back to the podcast you just did with Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who's a mutual friend of ours. I listened to that this past weekend and let him unpack that stuff for you. But people who have not lived with the disease of obesity can be given advice on maintaining their weight that's a lot different than somebody who's trying to lose weight or has lost the weight and lives with obesity, because it's going to relapse for most people in some sense of the word. So having treatments that can actually help people to level that metabolic playing field is pretty novel. And there are, even when we talk about the disease of type 2 diabetes, I grew up, maybe you have a similar experience, but when I grew up, I just thought of type 2 diabetes as just kind of like the fat people disease. Like you get fat and then you get diabetes. That's just what happens. But one of the crazy things that I've really learned, and I've learned so much in the last couple of years, just deep diving into this stuff for myself and trying to be around longer for my kids. Like that's my driver, is I just want to be here longer for my kids. My dad died of a massive heart attack at 54 and wasn't even that overweight, maybe, 10, 15 pounds overweight, but certainly not morbidly obese like I've been. One of the things that I've learned is I've met people who have been 700 pounds, close to 800 pounds, and have got their weight down through maybe some combination of obviously lifestyle modifications, medicine, and surgery. Many of those people aren't diabetic.
Yeah.
And that's crazy.
I was 550 and I was never even pre-diabetic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge misconception that people have about type 2 diabetes. There's a genetic component to all of this, even though that's hard, I think, for a lot of people to acknowledge.
Yeah, I did have liver problems. Like, I don't want to paint it as though I was like a healthy 550. I have many, many problems, but that was not one of them.
Yeah.
And yes, and like I said, I thought that too. I thought that this was a fat people disease. And then I met my friend's father, and through some conversation with him, and this was like 15, 20 years ago, he explained that he had type 2 diabetes, and the guy was lean. And I just couldn't understand, like, well, what is this guy just sucking down sugar all day long? Like, I didn't, and my observation was that he was not.
Yeah. And that, I think that's another thing that, that people, in addition to thinking that it's kind of a fat people disease, I think another thing that people get wrong is like that somebody has to be doing that. They have to be sucking down sugar all day, like drinking a big gulp and, maybe popping some Skittles like they're vitamins, for me, part of my journey echoes, I think maybe some of yours as well. I've heard some of your story as well, but when I was in high school, started to pack on weight, right? And really not like I wasn't huge, right? But I was different than my peers, right? I went to a very small private school. Our class maybe had 16 other guys in it. And I was the only one that really struggled with, not, having a six pack and being lean. And so that was when I started to notice, and I crept up. By the time I hit like the end of high school ish, I was about 225 on a 5'10" frame. So pretty overweight, right? I discovered at that time, like so many people who were struggling with their weight, the Atkins diet. And that was sort of my first, like, dipping my toes into the water of this ketogenic lifestyle. And the problem, honestly, when I say this, I want people to hear me the right way, but the problem with it for me was that it worked. It worked really well. I lost a ton of weight. I mean, and like, this was not like a healthy ketogenic diet, dude. I was stacking burgers. Yeah. I was stacking burgers, and I was, basically, if I was hungry, I tried not to eat, but if I was hungry, I snack on like nuts, and I was running at that time. It was 2002, 2003. I had a lot of friends in my small little world that were enrolling in the military and getting, they were either going to basic training or coming back. And when they came back, they wanted to stay in shape and they wanted to run. So I would run with them. We would just run and run and run. So it, not a super sustainable long term to just constantly be stacking burgers and munching on peanuts and then running 5 miles a day. So when I pulled back on that at all, the weight came back fast and furious. So I got from 225 down to like 170, and then I was on this like vicious 17-year roller coaster of chasing that same success. So I would be super extreme for 6 months until I would just, run my willpower and energy into the ground. And then on the upswing, I may have lost 25 on the downswing, but on the upswing, I was up 30 or I was up 35. And so by the time I got to, like 36, 37 years old, so like about a 16, 17 year span, I was at 319 when I walked into the doctor, and I had been feeling like narcolepsy level tiredness in the afternoon. I told my wife, I was like, I have cancer. I have something is wrong. And she's like, I better go see the doctor, So, when I walked in, he's like, your A1C is 8. That's why you feel the way you do. But the crazy thing is, like, I had never had this like slow march to type 2 diabetes. And I have my own personal theories about it. I think that COVID kind of pushed, if you had a propensity to metabolic dysfunction, I think the COVID virus, I think, pushed a lot of people over the edge. There have been some studies on it that have kind of shown this as well. But I had no slow march, which for most people it is. You go to your doctor, your A1C's, that's
Creeping
5.9.
up to 6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now it's 6. Now it's 6.2. But for me, I went from completely normal blood work one year to an 8 A1C the following year, and so it was like it really slapped me in the face. And my doctor was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I don't want to go on medicine." And he goes, "Well, if you don't, you need to do keto." And I was like, "I'll do it, but I just want you to know
Were
that."
you like, bro, I'm a professional at keto?
Yeah, I was like, "Don't try to teach me about keto."
Yeah.
I mean, because he gave me this book and he's like, they're talking about, getting into a ketogenic state and how you measure that.
You're
Like, I'm
like,
like,
I've
dude,
pissed on
I've
sticks
got
so many times.
I've got
Yeah.
like 80 half empty bottles of keto sticks in my cupboard in my
Right.
bathroom. Shut up. But yeah, I mean, so I was like, all right, I'll white knuckle this thing. And again, with my kids as my driver. So I did a full year of keto. Okay. And I heard you saying this the other day. I don't know if it was on the podcast you did with Spencer or whether it was a different one that you did that I was listening to. But no, it was a Substack article that you just wrote the other day is what it was. And like I white knuckled this thing. I was actually doing pokes in my finger with the ketosis blood meter and peeing on sticks and just doing the whole things. I was wearing a CGM that was reporting back to my doctor. Dude, I got my A1C from 8 when I started down to like 5.4 after a year. My
Which is a
A1C
beautiful
was,
A1C.
yeah, it's a great A1C, non-diabetic, right? The problem was twofold for me. At the end of that year, my insulin levels were still off the charts high. Like it wasn't even measuring. You get your blood work back and it's like,
So you were
here's the
still
norm.
insulin resistant,
Yeah, crazy.
but you were just not putting anything. You were just, no glucose was going into you, and whatever glucose you were creating was from probably protein
Yeah.
and I think you can even turn fat into glucose to some degree.
Yeah, the liver is a magical thing, which I think is one of the things that metformin kind of helps with is to kind of reduce the amount of or whatever glucogenesis or whatever the terminology is.
Right. So basically you are just utterly depriving your system of glucose,
Mhm.
but you're still very insulin resistant, which is type 2 diabetes.
Mhm. Yeah,
Right.
super like off the charts. And so the other thing is I started at 319 at the beginning of that year. I was 319. At the end of the year, my weight was 312. I lost
With the beautiful
7 pounds
A1C?
with the beautiful A1C. And I mean, I was following things to a T, right? And I can get into my hypothesis of maybe what was happening over the last couple of years. But suffice it to say, I was extremely frustrated. And so the doctor's like, well, you don't respond to this program like most people do. And I was like, I could have told you that at the beginning. I did tell you that at the beginning, because the other thing was like in my normal ebb and flow of yo-yoing on and off keto, the other difference over the last about year and a half for me was I didn't lose weight when I would go buckle down on it. I just didn't lose weight anymore. And I was, again, my poor wife, but I was like, this isn't working. Like, what's
Yeah,
wrong?
I have a theory on that. And again, we are not doctors, but my theory is that, you know, with something like keto, where you're not regulating total intake, you're regulating a macronutrient, but you're not regulating total intake. You do it a couple of times, and guys like you and me who have dieted over and over and over again, I don't think our metabolisms slow down markedly. But what happens is we suddenly get um, much higher levels of hunger
Mm,
hormones. Like we're just hungrier. And
mm,
so, yeah, our body goes like, oh, he's eating like this again. That means we're going to not get enough nutrition. Let's turn
mm.
this up, because the body is like, you're fucking with my savings account. Don't
Right.
do that. We want
Right.
this stored fat. That's my theory on just how, because I perceived dieting got harder. Like the first crash low calorie diet I ever did, I breezed through 2 months and it was like, yeah, I'm a little bit faint when I stand up. I'm cold all the time.
Mm.
It's not fun. I don't have high energy, but this is not hard. It really was not
Mm.
hard. 60 days of this liquid diet that was like 600 calories a day,
Wow.
breeze through it. Cut to 2 years later, I'm trying to do that and it's a fucking nightmare. It was
Mm.
like so hard and all I could think about was food. I'm struggling, hungry all the time. And it just like the rate of perceived effort grew substantially year after year. So with something like keto, yeah, you lose weight, you gain it back. You lose weight, you gain it back. You lose weight, you gain it back. It's going to be hard to undereat, even when you're
Mm.
eating steaks and stacking cheeseburgers, which the first round, easy. You just stack cheeseburgers. You don't really want that many. But like by round 7 or 8, your body knows what you're doing
Right.
and it's going like eat more cheeseburgers.
Right.
That's what I think. Again, there is no study that I can point to about this, but this is the only explanation I can come to why guys like you and me, you did keto for a year and you had lost weight previously. Why didn't you this time? Because you were hungrier, I
Mm.
think.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. And I think your theory is spot on. I mean, it's hard when you have like a unique lived experience that just doesn't track with like my doctor said at that point. He's like, I don't know, Dave, you're like 600 people through this program and you're one of like 3 people. And the thing that I think really perplexed him is he wanted to be like, you're not doing it right. But my
Right.
CGM fed right into his
He could see you were
chart.
doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's flatline. He knows I'm not eating carbohydrates.
Well, I would like to see a long-term study on his 600 people because if you had one doctor who was turning people's lives around left and right with keto, then we would have this solved. This would no
Mhm.
longer be a problem, I think.
Right. Right. Because, keto is hard to sustain for sure. Right. But I think there are people who get to a certain point with their obesity that they're willing to do anything.
Yeah.
And there are harder things to sustain because, like you said, with keto, typically you're so full from eating protein, you're so full from eating fat that the hunger typically for many people sort of takes care of itself, right? Until perhaps by your theory, and I think it could be very accurate, until it doesn't, right?
Right.
Until your body
round
adapts.
7, you've done it now. You've done versions of keto 8 times, and your body's just going like, we're not eating enough to sustain our weight.
Yeah.
Let's turn up the hunger. Let's get more leptin and ghrelin into the system.
Or even, again, not a doctor, not a dietitian, but I have to think that the your body does prefer to run on glucose. And so you deprive your body of glucose for an exorbitant amount of time. Then your body goes, well, I know that if we just keep eating calories, eventually I'm going to get some glucose or I'm going to be able to, like even as you mentioned too earlier, if you eat enough protein, your body does start to if you overeat protein, your body does start to convert that protein into glucose. And so that, yeah. I mean, the whole keto roller coaster was for me a very frustrating thing to land in my doctor's office and have him be like, okay, you need to do keto. But I knew it was coming.
Right. How about you need to do keto? It worked in one of the ways we wanted it to, but basically you're broken because it didn't work in the other way. You lost 7 pounds in a year.
Yeah.
Your A1C is beautiful now, but like that's not an adequate amount of weight loss.
Right. And he goes, well, you're a candidate for surgery. And I was like, I mean, honestly, at that time, I think sometimes I get the timeline screwed up, but I think by that time I was maybe 36 or 37. And I end up just saying, all right, I'll do it, but I'm scared to death about getting and I don't mean this as shit. Like, it's worked, bariatric surgery, metabolic surgery for so many people in our community has been a life-saving thing. Right. But for me, I felt too young to be rerouting things, rerouting my anatomy to try to fix something that I still felt like very much was a moral failing. Like I was doing something wrong. I don't know. It was hard to fathom because I had been white knuckling things for so long, but I just still believe that it was all just something that was morally broken in me. I wasn't doing enough. I didn't care about my kids enough, whatever it was, man. You do a lot of things mentally to yourself when you're living with obesity. But I end up thankfully not having coverage for bariatric surgery. And he goes, well, there are these new drugs out there that sort of mimic what bariatric surgery does. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, well, a lot of people think that bariatric surgery just works because they make you eat a lot less food. He goes, but actually what's happening in the background is there's a restoration of hormones, nutrient stimulated hormones, that starts to happen, and even improved insulin sensitivity that happens almost immediately after people get this surgery. So while there may be less food digested or less food to consume because your stomach's smaller, depending on what surgery you have, he said ultimately it's the restoration of these hormones that's helping people to really eat less mentally, because these are the hormones that signal satiation and control how much you eat. And he said they've found to do this with basically shots. And I said, okay, I might be open to it. So I went home, and that was at the point where I go, okay, I'm not putting anything into my body that I don't know what it is, how it came to be, how it's affecting other people, et cetera, et cetera. So when I came to the internet, I found at that time nothing. And so then I did the deep dive into the trial data and the history and the origins of GLP-1 medications and where they came from. And once I really learned what they were, I felt very safe taking them. But I also knew, like, if I found this information helpful, other people will too. And if I find help with this medication, other people can too. And I just wanted to give people hope and an opportunity to learn and then take that to their doctor and hopefully just have better lives. And so that's really the story behind On the Pen and kind of how we came to be. And now, we've got, hundreds of thousands of people across platforms that are discovering these medications and really getting their life back because they finally, again, like I said, they've leveled the metabolic playing field. It isn't that they've taken these, because trust me, I'm probably like public enemy number one when it comes to, not making lifestyle changes fast enough to see, like, there's a lot of contributing factors, but like astonishing success with these medications is the people that really lose a lot of weight on these medications are people that really buckled down with their lifestyle and use these as a tool to help level the playing field so that when you cut out your carbohydrates, you're actually losing weight, right? Because you're making, or, not that that's the only way to lose weight, whether people are just calorie restricting or they're macronutrient restricting or time restricting or whatever it may be. Couple that with movement, those people see a tremendous amount of success.
How long have you, what do you take and how long have you been taking it? And if this was presented to you prior to there being much information online, that's years, right? That's a few years ago.
Yeah. So I have been on Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide for people that don't know what that is. It's most everybody's heard of Ozempic. So that's kind of our starting point when we start to explain these medications. So Ozempic is a peptide that's called semaglutide, and semaglutide mimics a hormone called GLP-1, which is a nutrient stimulated hormone, meaning you eat food and your body releases this hormone in response to it. And it got all sorts of different signaling things that are going on between the gut and the brain, but primarily for purposes of weight loss specifically, it's signaling satiety to your brain. It's slowing down the rate at which your food digests. It's actually signaling the beta cells in your pancreas to release insulin more efficiently and appropriately. And so semaglutide targets one nutrient stimulated hormone called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. Tirzepatide, the active ingredient in the drug I take, targets two, GLP-1 and GIP. Incretin is the technical name. But the GIP hormone seems to help with some of the more harsh side effects that people experience with Ozempic, right? So it's just the newest generation. And I've been on it since that day in the office when I came back after a year of keto. He gave me the prescription. I went home, I read a bunch, and then I filled the shot maybe the next day or within that week, whatever it was. I've been on it for 2 years. And like I said, I started at 312 then. I had been down 7 pounds from the keto for the year. But by the time, just full transparency, I was so fatigued. Like 17 years of yo-yo dieting is not easy. It's not easy mentally, but it's also not easy on your body. I honestly think, Ethan, like part of the reason, and again, I don't have any proof for this, but my theory is that part of the reason I'm diabetic is because of that yo-yo, that intense down 25, up 35, down 25, up 35. I just think it led to a lot of metabolic dysfunction.
It would be really interesting if somebody took a look at that, because and I have listen, I could put my tinfoil hat on and go like, I think that the obesity epidemic in America, if we started to see post-World War II a slight uptick of weight due to, more processed foods being introduced into the American diet. But then immediately after, in the 1950s, we started to see like diet culture start to proliferate amongst the housewives, and you'd get like the first iteration of diet books and diet pills from doctors, which were basically just speed,
right?
And then the kids of those of that group would be more susceptible to obesity and type 2 diabetes, and then you couple that with obesity also being to some degree socially communicable, and like it's just like a perfect firestorm. We get more processed food, we get more diets, we get more, and then it's just this yo-yo of weight gain and weight loss and weight gain and weight loss and weight gain. And so now we have the situation we're faced with today, where most every single person I know has been on multiple diets. I don't know of a single person, not one that I can think of off the top of my head that hasn't been on some kind of diet.
Yeah, some sort of restriction. Yeah.
Some sort of restriction, whether it's like, people in Los Angeles don't like gluten. It was very trendy to have like gluten-free bakeries, and there's gluten-free pizzerias and stuff like that all over Los Angeles. But that's a restriction. I promise you the rate of celiac is not much higher in Los Angeles than it is in like, where else do they make pizza? Chicago and Detroit and New York. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just think it's become like this cultural thing. And the more we diet, the worse off we seem to be with our weight. It's fucking crazy. David, did I lose you?
On my screen.
I got you. There you are.
I'm back. Okay. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I've honestly never thought about that in terms of everyone in my circle, but even people who don't, comparatively at least, seem to struggle with their weight. Even they have been, I'm not eating this or I'm not eating that. I've cut this out for any number of reasons.
I would love to see some study that looked at how many of the people that wind up with type 2 diabetes have been on some diets throughout their
Right.
lives. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
would be interesting to know.
Yeah. And I think I don't know if we'll get there, right? Because the funding has to be there to do it. But I think what we will get in the coming years is there's so much power in obviously AI and what can be done um, through aggregating data through electronic medical records. For
Right.
example, one of the things that I always like to tell people is, they may be looking at GLP-1s, but then they're like, hey, there's a black box warning for medullary thyroid cancer. And they've actually, one of the big misconceptions about GLP-1s is that they're brand new and we have no idea how this is going to affect people long term. Well, with at least GLP-1 receptor agonism, I mean, we've had them actually out on the market for like 20 years. So it's not brand new. Um, and so what they're able to do is they're able to basically harvest and anonymize data from electronic medical records and look at huge swaths of the population. And so just like a couple of weeks ago, there was a study that dropped that I think looked at like 4 million patients living with type 2 diabetes. A lot of times this data actually comes from the VA, which is super helpful. They do very good at just keeping great records on health and things like that. But basically, what they did is they looked at like 4 million patients who were type 2 diabetic, and they cross-referenced the patients with this anonymized electronic medical records data. They took everybody who was on like a first-line type 2 diabetes treatment, whether it's metformin or I always love to talk about DPP-4 inhibitors because I feel like those sort of laid the groundwork for GLP-1s and the science behind that. But whatever it was, and they cross-reference it with those taking GLP-1 medications. And there was no increase or spike in that data between people on a first-line treatment, non-GLP-1, and people taking a GLP-1 for medullary thyroid cancer. Honestly, I don't know if you and Dr. Spencer got into this at all, but it's in rodents that it was observed. They give these, in phase 1 trials, they load down rodents with exorbitantly high amounts of these medications to see if they survive it. So, if there's some crazy signal and they start keeling over, maybe we don't take that to human trials, right? But in those early trials, when fed super high doses of GLP-1s, these rodents developed an increase in medullary thyroid cancer. But rodents actually have certain cell receptors in their thyroid that humans don't even have for GLP-1. And so that's sort of the thought behind that. But all the real world data seems to be showing that that's not actually a real increased risk.
Why do you think I talked to Spencer and Dr. Mike Israetel, who isn't a medical doctor, but he's got a PhD in physiology. He's a very smart guy, and he knows how to read these studies. And both of them are completely unconcerned with pretty much any of the reported side effects. And both of them seem to express that the most concerning side effects are individualized. And so that's just like, maybe you will be nauseous if you take it, but this isn't even widespread enough to be of concern. It's just like that might be an individual reaction to it, but actually the nausea isn't life-threatening. I mean, you could start to become dehydrated if you have prolonged nausea. So it's concerning to some degree, but it's mostly discomfort and not something like really medical. And yet there's so many, every other time I scroll through social media, there's somebody, the last thing I started to see is you'll go blind, which was what I heard about onanism as a child. Like, don't touch yourself, you'll go blind. This was like the big scary thing to send people away from doing that. I don't totally understand.
Wait, you can go blind from that?
That's what I was told as a kid. That's what my grandparents said as a kid, that to scare me away from spending too much time alone, I guess.
Oh yeah.
But it seems like, I didn't get bariatric surgery because I was scared. And honestly, no doctor ever, I don't think I was ever under the care of a physician and trying to handle my weight.
Mhm.
You know, I would go in and I would lie. I would say I weighed like a pound more than whatever their scale would go to, you know, for many years. The minute I topped 350, I would just say, and I knew their scale wouldn't go above 350. I weighed like 355 pounds for many, many years just to get out of even the embarrassment of standing on the scale.
Mhm.
And it was always something I was disinterested in. I remember, you know, for my work, I'd have to get a physical before pretty much every job because I have to be insured as an actor. If something happens to me, it could shut down the whole production. So the doctor I saw the most was the doctor who would sign off on my insurance. And she actually had more conversations with me about this than anyone. And she was the one who was finally like, look, dude, I'm not signing off on your insurance unless you get on a blood pressure medicine.
Mm.
Uh, this was over 20 years ago. Uh, and but even still, it wasn't like we have to do something about your weight. It wasn't something I was interested in until I became interested in it. And when I became interested in it, I was just like, I'll do this diet, I'll do this diet. And it was just this long struggle. I think I was always too scared to even look into the operation. So
Mm.
I never had a doctor bring it up to me. But I, I don't totally understand. I mean, from the point of view of a person who was overweight my entire life, um, the idea that I could go and have a procedure and have and allow that to be so helpful in my pursuit of weight loss. I don't understand the people online who are so interested in demeaning that, you know. And
Mhm.
now we have these drugs which look like they will put bariatric surgery out of business. That's what it appears to me.
Mm.
And that to me is not a bad thing because, like, if you can take a shot where the worst side effect is nausea, from everything I've heard and seen, versus having to have a surgery, I think that's a better option. At least it would be for me if I was
Mhm.
still a candidate for that. I don't totally understand this kind of like rabid desire to have a gotcha. It's bad. People are going to go blind. People are going to get thyroid cancer. It's almost like the people talking about this want that to be the outcome.
Mhm. I think it's multifaceted, right? I think for you specifically, seems like you have a very high penchant for empathy for people, but you've been somebody who has again bucked the trend of somebody who's been able to lose a tremendous amount of weight and keep that tremendous amount of weight off through discipline, right? And I think that for many people who have done that or have kept a certain physique despite their genetic predisposition to gain weight easily, there's this idea that there's a moral superiority or there is something that is noble or more noble about the fact that they've been able to white knuckle that and to see somebody else get similar results by simply taking an injection is just, pardon the pun, but it's just a hard pill for them to swallow. They have white knuckled and they've also, maybe that's become part of their identity and they take a lot of great personal pride and self-worth from that. And so I think that's sort of where some of that comes from. I
Yeah.
mean, there is a social currency in being thin. You having lived in a larger body, understand this wholeheartedly. You are treated differently generally. Maybe you were a little bit more insulated that, and maybe that's a huge leap. Maybe it was worse, but perhaps you may have been a little bit insulated from it being in movies and being, somebody who had fame and especially at a younger age. Perhaps you were a little bit more insulated than that, but I have to imagine that happened in your world too, where you're just treated
Oh,
differently.
100%. And to be completely frank with you, the most or one of the most appealing things to me about being an actor was just that I could then rationalize that the looks and the stares and all of that could be potentially because somebody recognized me
Mm,
and not because was the train wreck in
mm,
their view. Do you know what I
mm.
mean?
Yeah.
Like the rubbernecking of fat people, literally, it's like I'm the eyesore and
Mm,
that's how I experienced life. And then acting was like maybe they saw me on something and so their look isn't hurtful
mm.
anymore, you know.
Yeah.
I totally you know, one of the problems I still have is that I don't feel any different. Like, you know, walking around in my life, I still feel like I don't belong in places. I don't, you
Mm.
know, fit in. And but that's a whole other thing. Like this is my question to you as I'm a sober person. I've been sober a long time. Uh I still, you know, practice sobriety and what got me sober. I have some guardrails with food that I really, really try not to let down. I had somebody in my life pass away very recently, and I
Mm.
spent 2 days just emotionally eating, which was like I'm feeling a lot of pain and this is going to comfort me and make me feel better. So I kind of just like okay, I got to either I'm going to take 2 days, like, you know, I just existed without so much structure. I didn't drink because that's a real fine line where my life falls apart very, very quickly. Where food, I think it takes a little bit longer.
Sure.
Um, and so, like, I'm still dealing with that pretty much every day, that there's something within me that wants the sucker, that wants the soothing, that I have to work at when I'm on my path and on my plan, because I'm not getting that from food or drugs or
Mm.
alcohol. And so my question to you is, if that's in you at all, do you have to face that? Because you're obviously incapable really of doing that with food today, I would think, if you're taking this medication.
Yeah. I think it's a that is a question that only somebody with lived experience could contrive. Yes, is the answer. So I'm going to draw a little bit on my personal experience, and I'm going to draw a little bit on the community's experience. So there are, again, people within the GLP-1 obesity medicine community, people who've lost weight medically assisted, let's say. And one of the huge topics of conversation outside, for people who, are reaching their goal weight, who these medications really work for, because I think the other misnomer about these medications that they're the be all end all. They're not. That's otherwise there would be no research being done. And there's a lot of research being done by a lot of companies to get better medications or more broad spectrum medications. These are very targeted medications for those who they work for. They really do shut off this pleasure reward center in the brain. And they just did MRI studies. I just did a podcast about this a few weeks ago. It's fascinating, but they can see the areas of the brain that light up at the beginning of the study when they're not on medication, when they're shown pictures of highly palatable foods.
This is literally my concern for people, because if you're not then figuring that out in another way,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't we see a whole rash of like depression? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's completely warranted concern, because there are a lot of people who really have to rediscover comfort. They have to rediscover so many things. I mean, you talked earlier about feeling like the same person in your smaller body than you felt in your larger body. This, dealing with all that is a huge thing. But yeah, there's a lot of talk within the community about transfer addiction, right? If food was that crutch, if food was your pacifier, it's shut. Again, back to the MRI study, they inject these people with these medications and they watch the brain scans, the colors go away. They're not responsive anymore because it's not, that food is no longer, it's acting on that pleasure reward center, multiple areas of the brain. They're acting on. In fact, they're finding that these hormones are also made in the brain and the gut. And so there's the signaling that goes on between the two can't be understated. And that's why I always say metabolic playing field, because that signaling in people living with obesity is often broken. But there's a lot of talk about transfer addiction because there are people who no longer find the pacifier of food a pacifier that it once was. Or, they're studying these in everything from alcohol addiction to opioid addiction, because whether it's food or whether it's drugs or whether it's alcohol, it's shutting down that pleasure reward center. And so there are, I think, mental health implications to shutting down that part of your brain that I don't think have been fully explored or can even possibly be understood at this point. I think when you talk about how people rationalize that risk right now is that we do understand the risk of living with untreated and uncontrolled obesity and untreated and uncontrolled diabetes, right? It's terrible. 13 different types of cancer are associated with obesity. With type 2 diabetes, you have things from vision loss to amputations to just a really poor quality of life, right? And so when you weigh these things out, and the toll on mental health, on that side of things, it becomes easier for people to justify the unknown, right? But I think your point is astute. There are things that we haven't fully unpacked, and I think earlier I was talking about how these medications have been around for 20 years. GLP-1s have, but for tirzepatide, which is actually the drug that was used in the study that I'm referencing, interesting. There was a placebo control group. There was a liraglutide, which is an old GLP-1. And then there was tirzepatide, which is the one that I'm on. It's the newest, biggest blockbuster obesity diabetes medication. It was the tirzepatide that uniquely shut that part of the brain off, right?
Oh, wow.
And that's the GIP. So one of the things that people don't understand, if you've heard some of Ethan's podcasts that he's done with some of these doctors, like the one recently with Dr. Spencer, you will hear that GIP, GLP, that dual combination is what makes it better or superior. But we do not have long-term studies on GIP medications. We have, I think the longest study was about 3 years, the Surmount trial that actually measured pre-diabetics, right? This is an interesting one for your audience. So they for 3 years, pre-diabetics took tirzepatide, and what they found was that 94%, I believe, I could be slightly off on the numbers, but I think it was around 94% of patients who were pre-diabetic over this 3-year study did not develop type 2 diabetes. So as a prophylaxis for people who are on the edge with their A1C, it's just an amazing drug. But that's the longest study we've had because it's a 5 times stronger GIP medication than it is a GLP-1. And we don't have 20 years of post-marketing data on that. And so I think these are valid concerns for people to have. And one of the things that Dr. Spencer covered recently that I think nobody else is really talking about in the medical profession is how tirzepatide for many people who are on it a long time, like myself, can lead to this condition where there's a medical term for it, but it basically just like kind of apathy, like indifference, right? To things that they once enjoyed. And for some people that can mean exercise and movement, just a lack of demotivating, because if you're not getting sort of that dopamine hit from whatever it was that you used to get it from, and you suddenly remove that makes a huge impact on people.
Yeah, dude, I got to tell you, like, for me today, the best I feel is through exercise. If that got blunted, my life would suffer because of it. Do you know what I mean? So,
Absolutely.
and like, if I'm being just completely honest, there have been years of my life where it was a full transfer of addiction, where I went
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm not going to eat and I'm just going to exercise, and like, and I mean like for hours and hours and hours a day. And that was also unhealthy. And so like,
Mm,
I'm in this place where I'm trying to be radically moderate, right? And it and it
yeah.
and it takes a lot of effort for me because I'm the least moderate person
Mm.
on the planet. I am extreme. Oh, I like
Oh,
opioids. I'm going to be the biggest junkie on earth. I like alcohol. Well, I'm going to, read Charles Bukowski and wax poetic about alcoholism and the beautiful sadness of life. Food, I will eat everything. Um, Exercise, okay, I'm going to trade everything for exercise. I'm going to go ride every stage of the Tour de France and just like, but it's always at the cost of my real life that I think I want, of being a husband and father and
mm,
friend and coworker. And so like, trying to nail all that down, I am able to get a fix of dopamine from 40 minutes to an hour in the gym, and
mm.
it's enough. And I can say it's enough. If you turn that off, I don't, I don't know. And like, again, I would never try to talk somebody out of taking these,
Yeah.
um, but like, that apathy seems dangerous to me.
Yeah, so I don't know that it's everyone who takes it that experiences this. I think that if you were to talk to clinicians, I think it's probably on the rare side, but it does stand to reason when you think about the information, the data that we're gathering from some of these studies that are going on, that are trying to untangle how these work. That nobody knows how these work in the brain exactly. They don't,
Nobody
but
knows how the brain works
nobody
exactly.
knows how the brain. So I think these are important conversations to have. They because these medications work so well, because so many people are able to. The phrase that I use over and over is people are just getting their life back. I mean, there are just endless stories in the community of people who were once 500 pounds, 600 pounds, 700 pounds, or even just couldn't lose, that 50 pounds that they needed to, that are, back to normal blood work, normal labs, normal BMI, all these things. People are getting their life back. It's very almost hard to kind of broach the conversation about some of these things because people become so militantly pro something that's helped them, right?
Yeah.
But these are important conversations to have because there's no free lunch. I mean, and we only know what we know, right? 20
Right.
years down the road, who knows what we could learn about these medications but they
It's,
do.
I think it's a reasonable thing. The first time I was down, you know, 200 plus pounds, I had just a tremendous amount of loose skin.
Mm,
And there had never been a conversation. Nobody had had a conversation with me about loose skin. I just kept waiting for the skin to kind of,
go
I
away.
wanted to lose the skin. I was like, well, okay, if I keep dieting, the skin will go away, the skin will tighten up. And then when it didn't, I tried a whole bunch of other stuff to make the skin, but it wasn't something that was widely talked about. And then I even had some kind of, I think of as mean-spirited press articles written about me,
Mm,
pictures of me in Lycra riding a bike where I'm literally 13% body fat. I've lost, at that point, I think I'd lost nearly 320 pounds.
wow.
And the article, and had paparazzi following me, and they'd take pictures and then zoom in around my legs because everything else is covered in lycra, so you couldn't really see, but like skin bunched up around my knees, and say the downside of weight loss. And like,
Mm,
there's a I think a more empathetic version of that, and I think it's now a conversation that I'm really interested in having, because many people will lose 100 or more pounds and be like, what the fuck, I have all
mm,
this loose skin and I don't like it, and I don't like how I look, and this isn't what I expected. And so
mm. It
I
almost
think,
reminds me of like the first time that my wife had our first child
yeah,
and she got done giving birth and it was like the next day. And she's like, nobody tells you what giving birth does to your body.
right.
Like
Yeah.
it's the same kind of like watershed moment that you're like, you think you, this happens all the time in the obesity community is like people get to their goal weight or their maintenance weight and they get there and their whole time they had a destination in mind. Like it's a linear thing. Like I'm going to start here and I get here and then I'm done.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, like for many people, I have one friend who had bariatric surgery and then I think he was 760 pounds to start with. And he's down now. He weighs less than I do. He's like maybe 220 over the last 4 years or so. But now he's like, dude, it didn't scare me to have bariatric surgery. I was like, whatever, I need this to live. He goes, but getting this skin removal, which medically now I have to get, I'm being forced now to have this surgery because I have so much loose skin and it's so problematic. And he's like, this surgery terrifies me.
And dude, let me tell you, it's a brutal, brutal surgery. It sucks and the recovery sucks and you can't stand up straight. And even with all of that said, I'm glad I did it. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm happy that I did it, and I don't have, and I still, by the way, I still have a ton of loose skin. Like it doesn't even totally handle the problem. The idea I had, like you're talking about, that finish line was so prominent in my head for so long, and when it never came, and when I never just was like, oh, I have confidence. I don't feel shame. I don't feel like I lived a life of sin or immorality, like you talked about earlier. I think it's a very apt description of how I felt. It's really discouraging. And so I think all of this stuff should be talked about. We should talk about our experiences and to talk about like, listen, this thing could totally change your life. And it could improve this aspect of your life tremendously. But that doesn't mean that it solves everything. It doesn't
Right.
mean that there aren't other things that you're going to have to look at,
100%. 100%. I think that's probably if I had to boil everything down, like what is the biggest misconception that people have when they get into these medications? I think it's that for many people it happens so fast and so furious because these medications for so many people are so effective. They're just so effective for so many people, much less effective for type 2 diabetics and the weight loss department. But for those who it is effective, it comes fast. Like you're not spending 4 years in the gym to go from, a tremendously high weight to a, normal or more average BMI. Like it's happening for many people in a year.
Yeah.
Where they're losing 100, 150 pounds. And I have one friend, I think that went from, I think he was well over 400 pounds. I'm not sure that he was quite 500 pounds, but I think within a year, he had gotten down into maybe it was like 270 after a year, down from like 440 or I don't remember what it was, but just taking the GLP-1.
But I would be willing to bet with a guy like that, he is taking it and going, what can I do now to maximize this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He also was in the gym, constantly.
Yeah.
And to this day now, we're several years removed from that. He's in the gym all day, it seems like.
Yeah.
But again, he's trying to fill out loose skin. And like, so he got way down there, like in the 100s. And he's like, I have to bulk up. Nobody told me that when I got to this point, I was going to be so deflated and there's going to be all the skin. And so, I mean, there's just so many things to consider and so many conversations that need to be had. And I think it sort of underscores the importance for care with these medications, and not just a prescription, right? You do need care and you do need support along the way because, if you're not considering these things or at least good community is if you're not considering these things, they're going to smack you in the face when you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, Dave, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad Spencer put us in touch. I appreciate what you're doing so much, and I hope you keep doing it, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and chat today, and it's just an honor to meet you. I've actually, when we talk about this yo-yo, this roller coaster, there were many years where I went to your YouTube channel and was just watching what you're doing, and it was such an inspiration to me at the time. How you have been able to keep that up, like I need to find a way to tap into it because I was so fatigued of the roller coaster by the time I got in these medications that I have not, just being on an honest reflection, have not maximized them. And there's a lot of nuance that, I'll get in, say, for a different time and a different day, but really appreciate what you've done. Really appreciate your commitment to just spreading good information and building community around, just a very sensitive and difficult topic.
It really is. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Ethan. Nice to meet you.
You too.